11 days ago, NASA's Perseverance rover, which has been exploring the surface of Mars since February 2021, stopped sending data back to Earth. Not a partial signal loss, not reduced transmission quality, complete silence. For 11 days, the most advanced robotic explorer ever built by human hands sent back absolutely nothing. NASA's official explanation was solar conjunction, a period where the Sun sits between Earth and Mars in their orbital positions, interfering with radio communications. This is a real phenomenon that happens approximately every 2 years, and during which NASA routinely pauses commands to Mars missions as a precaution. There is just one problem with that explanation. Solar conjunction for this current orbital cycle ended 23 days ago. The silence happened 11 days ago, long after conjunction was over, long after communications should have been fully restored and operating normally, long after there was any legitimate astronomical reason for Perseverance to go quiet. And yet for 11 days, silence. When the signal finally returned, NASA released a brief statement saying Perseverance had resumed normal operations following a planned diagnostic pause. They used the word planned, as if they had announced this in advance, as if the astronomy community had been told to expect it. Nobody was told anything. There was no planned diagnostic pause announced before it happened. The silence began without warning and ended without explanation, and NASA called it planned and moved on. But what came back when the signal returned is the part of this story that has the people paying closest attention genuinely shaken. Perseverance carries a suite of scientific instruments designed to study the Martian surface, atmosphere, geology, and to search for biosignatures, which are chemical or physical signs that life may have existed or may currently exist on Mars. These instruments generate enormous amounts of data every single day. Images, atmospheric readings, ground-penetrating radar scans, chemical analysis from its laboratory called SHERLOC. When the signal returned after 11 days, NASA published a data release as they normally do. Images from the cameras, atmospheric readings, standard telemetry. But 3 categories of data that Perseverance generates continuously were missing entirely from the release. The RIMFAX ground-penetrating radar data, which maps what lies beneath the Martian surface, was absent. 11 days of subsurface mapping data simply not included in the release. The SHERLOC chemical analysis data, which identifies the molecular composition of Martian rocks and soil, was absent. 11 days of chemical readings not published. And most significantly, the full image archive from the rover's Z cameras, which capture high-resolution panoramic images of everything around the rover, was incomplete. Images were published, but with an 11-day gap corresponding exactly to the silent period. The rover was somewhere on Mars for those 11 days. Its cameras were running. The images exist somewhere. They were not released. Independent researchers who monitor NASA's data releases noticed the gaps within hours. When they filed inquiries with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which manages the Perseverance mission, the response they received said the missing data was undergoing standard scientific review before public release and would be made available in due course. Standard scientific review before public release is not how NASA normally handles rover data. Raw images from Mars rovers are typically made available to the public within hours of being received on Earth. This has been NASA's policy for years. It is one of the most celebrated aspects of their Mars exploration program. The idea that anyone on Earth can watch what the rover is seeing in near real time. That policy apparently did not apply to these 11 days. Now here is where the location matters enormously. Before the silence began, Perseverance was conducting detailed surveys of a specific area within crater, the ancient lakebed it has been exploring since landing. Scientists had been excited about this particular area for months because orbital imaging had revealed what appeared to be layered sedimentary deposits of unusual thickness and regularity. Sedimentary layers on Mars are scientifically significant because on Earth, sedimentary rock is where we find fossils, where we find the preserved chemical signatures of ancient life, where billions of years of biological history are written in stone. The deposit's Perseverance was investigating showed layering patterns that orbital scientists described in published papers as unlike anything previously documented on the Martian surface. The layers were too regular, too consistent, spread over too large an area to be explained by the known geological processes that create sedimentary deposits on Mars. Perseverance drove directly into the center of those deposits 11 days ago, and then went silent, and came back with missing data. 3 days before the silence began, a paper was submitted to a major scientific journal by a team of researchers from 3 different universities who had been analyzing Perseverance's SHERLOC data from the weeks leading up to the silence. The paper reported the detection of specific organic molecular compounds in the sedimentary deposits that, in the words of the paper itself, cannot be explained by known abiotic chemical processes on Mars. Cannot be explained by known abiotic processes. Abiotic means non-living. The paper was saying that the chemicals Perseverance found in those rocks cannot be produced by non-living chemistry as we understand it on Mars. That paper was submitted to the journal. It went through initial review. It was accepted for publication. And then it was withdrawn, not by the authors. The withdrawal notice listed the reason as data under review pending agency consultation. Agency consultation means NASA got involved and told them to pull it. The paper has not been resubmitted. The authors have not made any public statements. When journalists attempted to contact the lead researcher, they were told through a university spokesperson that the researcher was unavailable for comment on this matter. A researcher who was weeks away from potentially publishing the most significant scientific finding in human history is unavailable for comment. Think about what that means. Now let us put this into a broader context, because this is not the first time something like this has happened with Mars data. In 1976, NASA's Viking landers became the first spacecraft to successfully land on Mars and conduct experiments directly on the Martian surface. One of those experiments was called the Labeled Release Experiment, designed by a scientist named Dr. Gilbert Levin, specifically to detect signs of biological activity in Martian soil. The experiment produced a positive result. NASA announced the result was likely a false positive caused by a chemical reaction with an oxidizing compound in the Martian soil rather than biological activity. The scientific consensus accepted this explanation and moved on. Dr. Gilbert Levin spent the next 4 decades arguing that the positive result was genuine, that the data showed what it showed, that the explanation offered by NASA did not hold up to scrutiny. He published papers. He presented at conferences. He never stopped arguing his case. In 2019, Dr. Levin published a paper in a scientific journal arguing that the Viking labeled release data should be reconsidered as evidence of microbial life on Mars. He was 97 years old when the paper was published. He died the following year. He never got an official acknowledgement that he might have been right. But here is what makes his story suddenly very relevant right now. The specific area of crater where Perseverance went silent is the same area that orbital analysis identified as having soil chemistry, most similar to the conditions that produced the positive result in Viking's labeled release experiment nearly 50 years ago. Same chemistry, same type of location, new rover, silence, missing data, withdrawn paper. The pattern is not subtle. There is a concept in space exploration policy called the timeline of disclosure. It refers to the calculated, deliberate process by which space agencies and governments manage the release of potentially world-altering information. The theory, supported by numerous researchers who have studied the history of space exploration policy, is that certain categories of discovery are considered too significant to release immediately because of the social, religious, political, and economic disruption they would cause. The discovery of confirmed evidence of life on Mars, even ancient microbial life, would be the single most significant event in recorded human history. It would fundamentally change our understanding of our place in the universe. It would raise questions that every religion, every philosophy, every government on Earth would need to answer. It would reshape the entire field of biology. It would have immediate and profound implications for the search for life elsewhere in the universe. An announcement of that magnitude would not be made casually. It would not be dropped in a routine data release. It would be managed, carefully, over time, with extensive preparation for how the world would receive it. And while that preparation happens behind closed doors, the data gets reviewed. papers get withdrawn, rovers go silent, and official explanations get offered that do not quite add up when you look at the timeline. The Perseverance rover is right now, at this moment, sitting in the center of a geological formation on Mars that cannot be explained by non-living chemistry, surrounded by sedimentary layers unlike anything previously documented, holding 11 days of unreleased data in its memory banks, after a silence that began the moment it drove into the most scientifically significant location it has ever visited. NASA calls it a planned diagnostic pause. The data tells a different story, and Sky Pulse is going to be here every single day, watching the data releases, tracking the missing information, and reporting everything that the official statements leave out. Because if what Perseverance found in those 11 days is what the withdrawn paper suggested it might be, then what comes next will change everything. And you deserve to know before they decide. You are ready to be told. Subscribe to Sky Pulse. Turn on every notification. This is the story of our lifetime, and it is just beginning. This is Sky Pulse. Stay alert. We will see you in the next one.